All right, good evening, everybody. We'll get started. So Lindsay here, ACS coordinator for CSI Pacific, and I'm live in the room with our live attendees and Ashley, holding a little tiny microphone for those online. Um, Ashley's got quite the resume, so I actually wrote it out, and I don't usually like to read things about people, but I'm going to do it because you're just so awesome. Ashley is a registered dietitian and certified specialist in sport dietetics with a degree in nutrition and diet. I don't want to say that word again. Dietetics from Acadia University and a master's in exercise and sports science from the University of Sydney, Australia. Over the past several years, Ashley has been working at the Canadian Sport Institute in Victoria, working closely with the national men's and women's rugby sevens team, as well as with Triathlon Canada, and within the national mountain bike program through Cycling Canada, which you guys know. Um, Ashley has developed post-concussion recovery protocols for both rugby players and developed post-concussion, or sorry, for rugby players along with other high-risk athletes, which is pretty cool. You guys are also really lucky to get to attend live Ashley's last speaker series with us here at CSI because she's going to be moving to Ottawa and taking up a new role with the armed forces. So we wish her all the best. So know how privileged you are to capture her last presentation. She will do two more online though. So we're going to record two.
Getting all four done.
Yeah, we're going to record two ahead of time before she heads out. So if you guys want to capture Nutrition Series 3 and 4 from Ashley, that will be possible, but it'll be online only. Okay, so enjoy. Thanks, Lindsay.
Okay. And for those online, Drew will just put his hand up for any questions, and I will I will try not to ignore him. He does stand out a lot. Okay, so this is session 2 for nutrition through the training cycle. The first session I did was around off season, and it's online, and it can be listened to online. I don't know the link, but these fine people know where to get the link. We're going to focus on kind of the preparatory phase of training. So we've moved from transition or your off season, and we're looking at kind of general and specific prep. This is where I find, with the athletes I work with, where volumes tend to increase. Fatigue can really set in. You're working on also some specific skills depending on your sport. And I hope, hopefully we're really going to focus on probably some things that everyone here has heard before. And my apologies for being repetitive, but I find that I need to hammer it in, these kind of these topics into athletes, and it needs to be continually practiced before it becomes habitual and it becomes something that you're regularly doing on a day-to-day basis. And really able to adjust your nutrition for kind of how your training is going to look week to week, day to day, month to month through this period. So the next two sessions that we'll do online that Lindsay mentioned, one is going to be kind of a preparatory phase B. It's going to be more focused on when illness and injury can come into play and how nutrition can help with both prevention and with recovery. And then the last one will be around competition nutrition. And so we're going to get those up pretty quickly. We're doing them really fast. Okay. Again, today we're really going to focus on increased demands for your training needs and how to adjust them. We are going to focus specifically around things like hydration, pre-training nutrition, in-training nutrition, and recovery. We have a lot of different athletes, not so much here in this room, but out there online. And so what I've done is, hopefully you got the link from Lindsay where there are about 4 handouts around these topics. And the recovery one actually breaks down into different types of sports. So there is one that, for your recovery, there's an endurance focus. There is a power and team sport focus. There is a strength and combat focus, and there's a kind of an aesthetic focus. So for, I do work with diving, but for also gymnasts or figure skaters, just to kind of really hone into individual sports So you're not just given blanket recovery guidelines that may not actually meet the needs or your own demands of your sport. So we will be going through each of those those handouts. And there's going to be some work here done in the room. So online, I'll prompt you as well for taking some time to really put some thoughts together and put some ideas together. Okay, so when we look at, depending on what your coach has for you, it might be a similar yearly training plan that looks like this. And I want you to focus on the load, the red there kind of at the bottom. And you'll notice there's kind of different bars and how some are filled a little bit less, some are filled a little bit more. And you'll notice that there's some weeks like where it says high. Those are high volume weeks where it's just like you are being hammered on a day-to-day basis and you're coming out pretty fatigued. And then there's going to be lighter weeks where you might trail off at the end of a block, or kind of more moderate weeks where you have a little bit more stores left in the tank, but they kind of layer on top of each other. And really what we want to look at is how, not all of these training periods, you don't need to eat the same way for each day or each block. You can kind of fluctuate how you're adjusting your intake and your recovery as well. So what I have here is everyone who is here has this handout, and it is a training week. So it's 7 days, Monday to Sunday. And online, you'll have this on the slides, but you can also take a pen and paper and you can kind of put a chart together, because what I want you to do is take some time and put together what your typical week of training looks like. I realize it can change week to week, but I actually want you, what you typically would see for your training. And you might need to use this from like years or last year if you're kind of just going into your preparatory season right now. And your coach is sitting there and putting your training together. But look at, from Monday to Sunday, I've put in 3 training sessions. Does anyone do more than 3 training sessions a day? Okay. So this allows you to put in 3 training sessions or less, however many you do. The time that you're doing those training sessions and the length. So for example, I'll just show you an example. This would be for rugby. So same kind of outline. What I've done is Monday, Tuesday, they have, speed session. It's 60 minutes, the time of day that it is. They have a weight session for 90 minutes, the time it is, and then they have a rugby session and the time it would be. Their weekends are going to be off, and then their Wednesday, Thursday are a little bit different as well. So I want you to first just start writing down what your training week actually looks like. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that. I know there's a lot of endurance athletes here, so I also have a mountain bike example too. Really? They're probably looking at like rugby and be like, yeah, we got the beat. Yeah, rugby, whatever. Pardon? No, I'm not. Am I muted? No, I don't think so. I don't think. No, I'm not. Okay, sorry. Well, I'm. It's okay. It's me. So once you guys have done kind of the plan, so trying to get that done, I want you then to color, well, maybe not color coordinate it because you don't all have beautiful markers, but put, either an H, an M, or an L, so for hard, medium, light, over the days that would be kind of the red days, which would be hard days, the yellow or it's supposed to be orange would be medium days, and the green days would be a light day or an off day. So a light day might also be like a really like you do just a mobility session for 45 minutes to an hour, and that would be considered a light day. It doesn't have to be a complete day off, but just getting a sense of which days in your week are going to be hard or medium or light training days. Okay, so everyone got that? Almost done? Pretty well done? Okay, all right. So we're gonna kind of use that template for the rest of the session. No, this is not, I'm not doing it on my computer. I need this. Okay, oh, sorry guys, you can't even read that. So I'm not gonna go into this concept of low energy availability or energy availability, but I just kind of want to do a broad kind of statement about, when we think of, our training and the volume of energy that you're expending, we really want to make sure that we're ideally and properly fueling because, getting enough energy when we take into consideration what you're taking in and how much energy you're expending out, it's going to have implications on your health, but also performance, and most athletes are more concerned about performance. So when you are in, an energy available state, or you're getting enough fuel for the training that you are doing, it's going to help with things like strength gains, body composition adjustments, lean mass gains, things like coordination and concentration. Your stores of carbohydrates or your glycogen stores are going to be optimized. And also it can really play a part with the amount of illness, the recovery from illness, the frequency of illness, as well as the recurrence of injuries and the recovery from your injury. So when we do see, we want to really ensure that if you are in a low energy available state, you're going to have, like, these are all going to be compromised. All of these health and performance markers are going to be compromised. And some signs of underfueling that you might feel, especially during this period when you are increasing your training, would be kind of fatigue. Sleep might be affected. Your overall concentration might be poor. you're not recovering as quickly as you should be, that could be a sign of underfueling. You may not be actually getting the increases in power or speed or strength gains that you're, from the work that you're putting in. You might be not putting on as much lean mass, or you might be losing some lean mass. And then for female athletes, there's some implications with menstruation. So there's lots of high risks when you're not getting enough fuel. But that's a whole other conversation that I could go on and on about. So we're going to start with some boring fundamentals, I know, and I'll go through these quickly. And I preach this a lot, common sense doesn't always mean common practice. So starting with meal timing. When you get into this phase of training, you want to make sure that you're eating regularly. So if this is something that you notice, like, oh, I've gone 5 hours without eating, that could be a sign that you're actually not fueling optimally and you need to start eating a little bit regularly. So for hard and moderate training, every 2 to 4 hours, trying to get something in, whether it's a snack or a meal. And then for easy days or rest days, you might be pushing that a little bit more to say, 4 to 6, 4 to 5 hours. And that's just to manage your energy levels so you're not having big crashes in energy, and to make sure you're topping up and you're consistently recovering during these high volumes of training. Okay. So this is sometimes what it might look like in a day when we're thinking of, in your preparatory phase. This is for a rower. They train crazy, and I am so impressed with rowers. And this is so that you're looking at 2 pretty big volume sessions quite early in the morning. But you can see all those stars are times, well, all the stars except for the yellow are times when they are eating. So they're having snacks or their meals, and some are going to act as a pre-training snack. Others are going to act as a recovery snack. They're looking at, still having a dinner and then having even an evening snack. So it's quite consistent eating, and it will all depend, obviously, on the sport that you're doing, but also your work and your school schedule if you are in school and or working. But this is kind of like a snapshot. And a really simple way, this can be the most basic way to really adjust, especially your meals, is by adjusting your plates. Hands up who's seen these before. Yeah, okay. So, online, these are just, for you to use as a simple tool, and I've built them into your recovery as document as well. But again, what you're looking at is adjusting the amount of carbohydrates you need compared to the volume of training on those different training days. So for light training day, you're looking at maybe a quarter of your plate being a good quality grain, half your plate from fruit and vegetables, and then a quality protein source, whether it's a vegetarian or an animal-based protein, a little bit of fluid, and some healthy fat. So things like olive oil or canola oil or butter or coconut oil if you choose, or salad dressing. And then as your training gets a little bit higher volume, so this would be more of like a typical training day, so especially those moderate training days, you are looking at a little bit more of your plate containing carbohydrates. Same amount of protein, kind of move the fruit to the side, and the vegetables are also on the plate. And then again, as you get into a really heavy block of training, so if you're going out to a training camp, and it's going to be 2 weeks of pretty intense day in and day out, even though you might have a rest day in there, it's still a huge volume in those, say, week or 2 weeks. This is the plate that you'd probably be wanting to follow during those periods of time, as well as for really heavy training. And again, I find a lot of the time this is a very endurance-focused plate, whereas sometimes for some of the other strength combat sports, you might be looking more at the typical training plate on those heavier days. Okay, second thing I'm going to go through is just protein timing. So this is the other thing. So we talked about meal timing, and then protein timing is going to be equally as important to optimize your muscle turnover. So turning over those tissues, whether it's work you're doing in the gym, work you're doing on the field, work you're doing on the track, or work you're doing on the bike or the skis, or in the pool, you're still turning over tissues that are being used and require protein. And so this is just, I've used this in the past. Many of my colleagues who might have done presentations to you in the past have used this study, but it's looking at different types of timing of protein. So 80 grams total were given. Some people were given it 40 grams twice a day. Others were given 4 slots of 20 grams, where others were given, that's 8 slots of 10 grams over the course of the day. And the best kind of structure was that 20 grams of protein 4 times a day to optimize that muscle protein turnover, or what we call muscle protein synthesis. So much better than just getting 2 big chunks of protein, say at lunch and dinner, or getting little pieces of protein over the course of the day. So really trying to get 20 to 30 grams of high quality protein at every meal that you're eating, so breakfast included, is going to really help stimulate that protein turnover in your cells and in your muscles as well. So that's kind of the other big piece. Baseline hydration is, this is where you want to make sure you're hitting these hydration goals. Baseline, you really want to be taking in about 30 to 35 mils per kilogram of body weight every day. Baseline. That's not even thinking about what you need from your sweat losses in training. So for a 60 kilo athlete, that's about 2,000 mils, 2 liters of fluid. And then we add on training needs. And that's one of the handouts is all about hydration as well. So this is really, if you're struggling to meet this is the first key to really start making sure you're well hydrated going into especially during a heavy training block. You want to be hitting that baseline and then meeting your training needs. Okay, so now to get a bit more into the nitty-gritty, I wanted to go through that first part a little bit quickly, but really focusing on smart fueling around training. So with your sheet, okay, so you're going to pick one of your hardest days, whichever day you want to pick, one of your hardest training days. And I want you you can do it on the back of the sheet if you want. I want you to plan your fueling around either, if you have 2 sessions, around both of those sessions. And I want you to think of the 4 hours before that training session. How are you going to fuel yourself? How are you going to hydrate yourself during that session, if necessary? And then immediately after. So just the initial recovery. So not the rest of the meals throughout the day, just that initial recovery. So for example, if you had a session, say at 3 p.m., you might include lunch in that 4 hours before training and then maybe a snack. And then what are you going to be doing during that training session and then the immediate recovery afterwards. So the type of foods that you might want to choose, it could be a meal, it could be a snack, and then what types of fluids you might want to drink as well. Okay? Any questions? All right. Break. When it can be made into a competition. Give you guys another 30 seconds. Okay. So yeah, so that's just the rugby, the hard session for the rugby and piecing that together for rugby. Hi. No worries. Hi. You can come in. It's okay. Okay, so I've made this pretty simple and I piece things together around training and going into training into time slots. And I find this translates quite well in racing, at least in a lot of the sports I've worked with. So I found like for mountain bike, for triathlon, I've used these kind of time slots as well. And then in rugby also. And so I have a 2 to 4 hour time slot, a 1 to 2 hour, and a 30 to 60 minute. And obviously, things are going to shift a little bit as you get closer to that start of training. And I find not all sports need this 30 to 60 minute pre-training snack. It might fall around the timing of your training session and how your meals fit. But I find I find mostly more endurance and more team power sports might choose that 30 to 60 minute little bit of a snack before training. But if we focus on 2 to 4 hours, this is where your big meal is going to be. You have enough time to digest a pretty decent sized meal, and you want to ensure it does have a good source of carbohydrate. It has some protein in it. You can use the plates for this kind of meal. So if you're going into a hard training session, you might use that hard plate. You can tolerate a little bit of fat, and then you want a bit of fluid. And so depends on body weight. So I use to individualize it for people, I would look at their weight in kilograms, and I would multiply that by 5 to 7 mils. And that usually depends on the size of the body. It might be anywhere from a cup to, say, 4 cups of fluid that you can have from water or from milk or dairy alternative beverages. And so most of the examples that I provided are going to be things like either a breakfast meal or a lunch or even a dinner meal if you have evening training sessions that go quite late. And then sometimes, especially in that rowing situation, or does anyone here have really early morning practices? Yeah, swimming or, yeah. So in triathlon, you're usually in the water early, or for swimmers. So this 2 to 4 hour may not fit. You don't want to wake up at, say, 3 a.m. and be like, wait a minute, like, why do I have to do this? You're sacrificing your recovery from sleep. So you're probably just going to ignore that. And you're going to focus more on maybe the 1 to 2 hours. That fits a little bit better where you can wake up an hour before or 75 minutes before going into the pool and get a small meal or snack in. So the size of the volume of food shrinks. You are still focusing on carbohydrates, and you're getting a little bit of protein, and then you start to carve away the fat and the fiber. So for example, maybe you are having, let's say, a sandwich or something pretty basic, and you're having it on a bagel maybe, and you want to choose, you usually choose a whole grain bagel. Maybe you choose something with a little bit less fiber. So even a multi-grain bagel has a little bit less fiber than a whole wheat bagel would have. So it's a little bit easier in your stomach to digest, and you notice the fluid comes down. This might also be a time where liquids can work. So if you're going into a hard training session, hands up anyone who has an uneasy stomach going into a pretty tough session. Anyone? Oh, iron stomachs all here? Oh my gosh. Okay. So for those who do not have iron stomachs, a smoothie might work. So a liquid snack can be a little bit easier. Things like a yogurt parfait are really easy on the stomach, and then just like a PB&J sandwich is pretty basic. It's also pretty easy to pack and make, and that can be something simple to have. And then that's pre-training snack would be a very small, you're looking at just carbohydrates, no protein, and then no fat or fiber. Sometimes people can tolerate a little bit of protein. So for example, some people might have a Cliff Bar or half of a Cliff Bar. There's a little bit of protein in a Cliff Bar, and you might be fine digesting that. Do any of you guys have back-to-back sessions? So like you only have 30 minutes between sessions? Anyone here? Yeah. So what does that normally look like for yourself? Okay. And you have about, 30 minutes or? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So this is also period of time can act as a pre-training, a little bit of a recovery, and a pre-training for that second session. So in those situations, it might just be where you have like half a Cliff Bar or half a banana or something with a little bit of fluid, just to make sure you're getting through to that next session. I find the same in rugby. A lot of the time they'll go straight from a speed to a weight session and have very little periods of time of rest between those sessions. So that having something that's quite small, that's focused on carbohydrates, will get you enough energy, and then you have your major recovery at the end of that next session, yeah, because you have more time. Any questions about that? There is a question online. Yep, we're going to talk about protein powder. Don't you worry. So just some beautiful pictures of food, just to make you more hungry. This is kind of what you might look at in the volume of the food and how it changes in size, in macronutrient density, so carbohydrate a little bit heavier as you get closer to your training session. Okay. So during training, and again, not all athletes require something during training depending on the volume of your training. I suspect that most of you guys here would have volumes of training that would require a little bit of fuel to get in, especially if you're going out for long rides. So again, I have that handout that's for during training or in training nutrition. This can be kind of your guide to piece together what you would actually need. I find this is, at least in my experience with the athletes that I work with, it tends to be the thing that gets slacked the most and also the most difficult thing to take in. A lot of the time during a session, it can affect your stomach and how you feel during that session when you're eating something or drinking something. It can also affect, for example, you might feel like you're going to lose some speed during that session, or you're going to, if you're riding in a pack, you might fall back or you might drop off a pack. So you don't always grab for things like your hydration or a source of carbohydrate, a source of energy. And I find that a lot of athletes think they can kind of, get through it and they'll push through and they'll be okay. But what I notice when they start to fuel a little bit more, they notice that tail end of the training session, whether it's their last interval or the last 15 or 20 minutes of that training session, they just feel a little bit better than they did before when they weren't taking in any fuel. And they also feel a little bit better after training. So they have a little bit more energy throughout the day when you're trying to be a bit more aggressive with your in-training nutrition. And during this period of training, this preparatory stage, you want to be on top of all of your nutrition for training. So again, it depends on the session that you're looking at and the length of it. So anything under 45 minutes, really focusing on mostly hydration from water is going to be just fine. And then I talked a little bit about a mouth rinse for this 45 to 75 minutes. Anyone done this before? Anyone heard of it, a mouth rinse? Okay, what have you guys heard? Rob? Pretty much, it's like your brain is being tricked first. So it goes to your taste buds and your tongue, and it tricks your brain. So it signals your brain to then trick your body into feeling that there's some carbohydrates on board. And it really works well in these kind of shorter events, so in competition with shorter events, but also in shorter training sessions where you can actually feel like you have some carbohydrates on board and you have a bit of these pleasure signals that go through your body from your brain. However, it doesn't really work once you get kind of past that, especially that 75-minute. You actually need to consume it and swallow it. So does anyone know why you would use a mouth rinse? Why an athlete might use a mouth rinse in these training sessions? Yeah, Amelia? Yeah. Yeah, so they may not, so it's mostly having trouble during. So when you struggle to take things in during a training session, especially a really intense training session that's happening in that time frame, it can be really tough to tolerate anything in your gut. This can be really helpful to use. I find it also works very well for stop and go sports. So things like soccer, field hockey, ringette, rugby would also be a really good option too, where it's like a consistent like sprinting and then stopping and then sprinting and stopping on a field. And then I know that it's been used in swimming as well. It's just, you got to be careful of where you're spitting out that carbohydrate beverage. So the sheet that I provided you, it really just outlines that you're taking a swig of Gatorade, of Eload, of whatever sports drink you like to choose. You're holding it in your mouth for 10 seconds, and then you're spitting it out. So, and that act of holding it in for 10 seconds is having that cascade of signaling your brain to signal the rest of your body and your cells of your body. Tipping over to about an hour, you actually need to consume carbohydrates. So you need to swallow it. And for anything between 1 to 2 hours, you're looking at about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. Is really all you need. If you are just starting to try to take in a bit more carbohydrates during your session, you might start at the lower end and then push your way up. So that's 30 to 60 grams per hour. So if you're going out for a 2-hour ride, that would be a banana per hour. A banana would be about 30 grams of carbohydrates, and then you can take even more. And then for anyone who's kind of looking at more ultra endurance or big volume training sessions, and I find this is big time on the bike. Amelia, I don't know if you go out for any like skis over 2.5 hours, but you'd be looking at up to 110 grams per hour. Yes, there are ultra endurance athletes who can tolerate those huge volumes. And you're looking more at like your Ironman athletes who typically take in those volumes. But I have a lot of even mountain bikers who can tolerate about 90 grams per hour when they go out for, say, a 5-hour ride, and they're taking in that volume each hour. It requires a lot of thought, a lot of packing, and you also have to train your gut to be able to tolerate that kind of volume of carbohydrate. So you might start at, say, even 40, and then work your way up. So the first time you go out for, say, a 3.5 hour ride, you're going to say, okay, my goal is 40 grams per hour. The next time you're like, okay, I'm going to try 45, maybe 50, and then just slowly build up, because you can actually train the cells of your gut to be able to tolerate more and more carbohydrates. And that's the same for males and females. There's no actual gender difference there. Okay, any questions about that? Yeah, Rob. Mm-hmm. So if you were to do a mouth rinse for a longer period, like for a longer training session, there is the risk that your blood sugar would actually crash and you would have a bit of a crash. And if you're not recovering well after, yes, you could definitely have a crash and your blood sugar would crash. So that's why you have that kind of top end 75 minutes and no longer. You actually need to really make sure you are getting something consumed in. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is switch with the person beside you. Maybe if you want, Jeff, if you want to be involved, or maybe the three of you guys can switch up so Amelia and Jeremy, you could switch, and I want you to switch your paper, and I want the person that you switch with to um, essentially rank or analyze what you wrote down for pre-nutrition and during nutrition for those training sessions and make changes if necessary based on kind of what we just discussed. Do you guys want to switch all the three of you guys maybe? Sure. Okay, so Nicole asked that. Okay, so around ultra endurance events, can they still hear this? Okay. It can be very individual, and it takes a long time to train the gut to be able to tolerate carbohydrates. Probably with those volumes of training and maybe at a lower intensity of training compared to a short, really intense race, you can tolerate a little bit more, and I hate to use the word complex carbohydrates, but a little bit slower digesting carbohydrates that might be a bit, you know, not kind of rush through you as quickly as, say, just drinking sports drink might do for say, 15 hours of an ultra endurance race. Ultra endurance also are usually able to take in some protein kind of after a 5-hour mark. You can actually add in a bit of protein as well. And then even they might be able to tolerate a little bit of fat, but it's typically in like for ultra endurance racers, they would work very extensively with a dietitian, a sport dietitian, to find out the actual food that they would need to be consuming that they're tolerating for their racing or training. Yeah, yeah. And I've never worked with any I've worked with a couple Ironman, but not ultra endurance runners, so or trekkers. Yeah. Just pre-training and in training, not recovery yet. Yeah. Yeah. No, so great question. So we just yeah. So I just need to repeat it. So online, just Drew, we had just had a question. Sorry, guys. So Quentin just asked a great question about when you are planning your hourly quota of carbohydrates, should you spread it out or should you eat it all at once? It really, what I have found is it depends on your sport. So I find in cycling or even in triathlon when you're on the bike, you can actually plan. So you can plan, okay, I need to get, say, I'm going to aim for 45 grams this hour and 45 grams this hour. And then you say, okay, every 10 minutes I'm going to take a bite of a Cliff Bar. And then the next 10 minutes I'm going to take a bite of a Cliff Bar. In other sports, it really just depends on when you get breaks. So for field sports or court sports, you're trying to just work in breaks within that hour and make sure you have a carbohydrate source at the side of the pitch or the side of the field that you can get something in to get through that hour. So it might be you only have 2 breaks or through that hour, so you actually have to eat a larger volume of food during those breaks to make sure you're hitting that quota. Same thing for cross-country ski. It would be, like breaking those hours up into times that you need to be taking something in. So really good question. Has everyone reviewed any major themes or gaps that you were seeing, or is everyone on the spot? How are you guys doing? Yeah. You guys have some good nutrition support, so yeah. 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 So we just had a question about, again, a break in training that would be 60 minutes between 2 training sessions. So, and whether a full meal would be too much or enough for that 60-minute session. So it kind of goes back to those time frames in that pre-training guide that you have. And probably a full meal in 60 minutes would be a little bit too heavy on the gut. So you might be looking more at that middle section where you're having a snack, a larger snack. So it would still have some protein and some carbohydrate, and it would still kind of act as your recovery as well as some pre-training. And it might be something like a smoothie that you can easily consume, or maybe you can get in some yogurt and granola and fruit in that time period. But probably you're looking at a little bit smaller than a meal at that time. You might just want to vomit going into your next session with a full meal. Yeah. Okay, so any themes that anyone saw? Anyone wants to share? Any? Or like rat out your teammate on like they're not eating or drinking enough during training? Yes? No? You guys are good teammates? Okay. So I put some ideas up here, and on this slide deck, I've also included a ton of recipes. I mean, a ton. There's probably like 10 recipes I put. So I put like I think I put a no-bake muesli bar, some energy ball recipes. I did put a homemade sports drink there. I didn't put the recipe up, but I can, if you want the recipe, I'm happy to share it. You can just send me a note or ask Drew or Lindsay. Yeah. In the slides. So they're all embedded in there. Yeah, so everyone will have a copy of those different recipes. Okay, so we're going to go into recovery. So this is the kind of the last piece of the pie and equally important. So again, there is the recovery handout, and it's long. I realize it's quite long. When you probably got it from Drew for those who are online, but it's broken into sections. So the first 2 pages are really outlining kind of your basic needs for recovery, and then a little bit more details on total amount of carbohydrates and protein based on your body weight. And then the next slew of pages is kind of based on your sport. So there's a section A that's for endurance. There's a section B that's for power and team sports. There's a section C that's for strength and combat sports. And then there's a section D that would be more for aesthetic sports as well. So the recovery is a little bit different with each of those sections. So really, you have your big 3 R's of recovery. This is how I make it pretty simple to think of recovery: refuel, rebuild, and rehydrate. And that first page gives you lots of information and pictures of foods that are going to be really appropriate. And they're mostly food-based examples, and then hydrating beverages as well. But I do want you to look at the second page. And what I want you to do is on the second page, and Amelia, I'm sorry, we already did this in sports school, but I want you to find your range of weight that you would fit under. So I have anywhere from 40 to 90 kilos. If anyone is below or above that, please let me know, and we can put that in. But just finding that range of weight that you would fit in. I'm sorry if we have any, especially rugby players, who might be a little bit over that 90. Most of my rugby males are well over 90 kilos. So, but just highlight kind of where you would fit. And I want you to do that for the protein and the carbohydrates. Yeah, they are only in the PowerPoint, yeah. And I can send that. I guess I can be sent to everyone. Yeah. Okay, so when you look at your weight, so your weight in kilos, what it then gives you is for first you have your refuel, and that's your carbohydrate. And that would be, the next column would be, okay, based on your weight, what is the low end and the top end of carbohydrates that you want to be hitting? And that's from 0.5 grams to 1.2 grams per kilo of carbohydrate that you want to be taking in. So, and I find that doesn't really mean anything. Who knows, like, what is 108 grams of carbohydrates? Who knows? So we then relate it to fists. So if you take your fists, and usually it's kind of like a smallish fist like mine. So one fist would be equal to about 30 grams of carbohydrates, power to the people. And so you would then take that total grams and divide it by 30 grams of carbohydrates to get a sense of how many fists. So depending on, obviously, your target of carbohydrates based on your body weight, you may need only half a fist to up to maybe 4 fists, maybe 5 fists, depending on your fueling needs. And then, to look at those fists, it then relates it to food. So the next column says, okay, well, 1 fist of carbohydrates is about 30 grams of one fist is equal to 30 grams of carbs. How does that equate to food? So 1 fist would be about a cup of cooked grains, so things like pasta or rice or quinoa. It would be 2 slices of bread or half a bagel or an English muffin, or two small dinner rolls or a large wrap, like the big 10-inch wraps. Or it would be a banana or 2 cups of berries or 2 cups of sports drink. So it's kind of relating it to actual food. And then what you can then do is, now that you kind of get a sense of what 1 fist is in terms of carbohydrates, you can also look at packaged food, so crackers or granola bars, or if you like to eat Cliff Bars, you can actually look at a Cliff Bar and say, hey, like 1 Cliff Bar has about 45 grams of carbohydrates. It's about a fist and a quarter or so. So to give you an idea of, relating that back to that 1 fist. Okay. So any questions about that? So then you now know, okay, the range of number of fists you need to get in your recovery from carbohydrates. And then, anyone like to golf? Anyone? I don't, I'm terrible. Yeah, so now we use golf balls for protein. So we have like all these visuals. So for protein, same thing. You look at your weight in kilograms, and then it gives you the total amount of protein that you need in that recovery, and it's a range. And then how many, I've done kind of how many ounces of protein. Don't worry too much about that. Focus on the number of golf balls that you need. So 1 golf ball of protein is about 7 grams of protein. So if you need, say, oh no, this is just me. Yeah, they have it all. I'm just explaining it. So 1 golf ball is 7 grams. So say you need about 20 grams of protein in your recovery. That would be about 3 golf balls. And then what I've done is put the food that would equate to 3 golf balls. So whether it's chicken, it's about the palm of your hand, or 3 eggs, or 3/4 of a cup of Greek yogurt, or 3/4 of a cup of tested protein would be another option. If you like tofu, it would be about the size of the palm of your hand of tofu. Or for hummus, it's a cup and a half of hummus. And for peanut butter, for those who rely on peanut butter for the recovery, you need to eat 6 tablespoons or 6 big thumbs of peanut butter to actually meet your recovery needs. So I find hummus and peanut butter, you usually need to combine it with another protein source to really make sure you're getting enough golf balls in your recovery. Okay. Any questions about that? How are you guys doing? Okay. So I then want you to take out your rehydration sheet. So for those online, hopefully you have a copy of that and you can pull it up. Has anyone ever checked their hydration before and after training before? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. This is a great skill to start learning to do. So we talked about what your baseline needs are for hydration, and now you're going to get to know your body's training needs of hydration. So what I really want you guys to start doing is, depending on the training session, you might do this for different types of training sessions in different types of climates, or if you go to altitude, you might do it at altitude, or if you go to a really hot training camp, you would do it in the heat, is you're going to take your weight before training, so weight pre-training. Okay, shoes off, no helmet, no food, kind of like minimal equipment as possible. So you're going to get on the scale and record your weight. And so, so maybe I'm going to make this easy because I'm really bad at math. So maybe you're 60 kilos. And then, really simply, after your training session, before you recover, so it has to be immediately after, you are going to take off any equipment, you are going to take off any extra food that you might have packed, wipe off any sweat, and you're going to weigh yourself again. So you're going to do a post weight. And so say with that, it might be 58 kilos. Making it very simple. So there's a difference there, and that's the difference of 2 kilograms. Yes. And so that is actually, even though you have been eating during training, this is a really good indication of what you've actually sweat out, what fluid you have lost from that training session. I find this is very common in team sports, in endurance sports like you guys here, that you are losing a lot of sweat, and especially you might be shocked in climates like this that you are actually sweating quite a lot. Even for swimmers who do this and they come in and out of the water, they actually are still sweating in that water, and they are dropping some weight. And so 2 kilos of weight would be equal to 2 liters of fluid loss, because 1 kilogram of weight loss is equal to about 1 liter of fluid losses. So this gives you an idea of being like, oh my God, I just lost 2 liters of fluid. And so what you want to then learn from is, okay, how do maybe I'm going to lose a little bit in training, but how do I reduce how much I'm losing, because I know this is going to affect my hydration status. So how can I drink a little bit more and a little bit more in that training session? So you might say, okay, I'm going to actually add a little bit more fluid. I may be only having, half a bottle an hour in my training session, so now I'm going to have 3/4 of a bottle an hour. And I'm going to notice if I've lost a little bit less. This also plays a part in your rehydration, your third R of recovery. And you want to make sure that you're getting about 1.25 to 1.5 times your losses in fluid. So you're taking in a little bit more fluid than what you've lost over the course of, the next 4 hours or so. And that's what that hydration, the rehydration sheet really outlines, kind of that rehydration of weighing yourself and how to get a little bit more fluid in after you've finished your training. And anyone know why you'd want to actually drink more than what you've lost? Anyone know? Idea? You pee. So you're going to pee some of that stuff out. So you want to take in a little bit more. So you're accounting for any what we call urinary losses. Yeah. Okay. So any questions about this, about like kind of those carbohydrate protein needs and the rehydration? Getting a little bit specific here. Has anyone looked at their actual grams of carbs and protein and hydration before? Is anyone kind of like, holy crap, this is like a lot going on? Yeah. So it's just a starting point, and that's what these packages are meant to use as a tool, so you have some targets for your recovery. For every sport, those 2 pages for specific recoveries, what they have are some examples of what you could actually have for a recovery idea, the targets that you would want to be hitting, and also if you're using a meal for your recovery, if you just simply want to use a plate. You don't have to necessarily be like, oh, I need like 27.25 grams of protein. I need to get this amount. You can also use your plate. So you can also use that basic plate and say, okay, I'm using lunch as my recovery. I need to follow the hard training plate and make sure my plate looks like this. So I'm getting some pasta and some meat sauce and also some vegetables. So it's another tool that you can use, and sometimes it's a little bit more of an easier tool just to have a quick reference for as well. So for each of your sports, it will have recovery guides for after a hard training session, after a weight session or a moderate session, and then what you would need to do for recovery for after a light training session. So if you're just doing, an hour mobility and, you don't need to be as aggressive about your recovery, you might just follow that lighter training plate to help with that recovery. Okay. All right. So I feel like we're supposed to finish at 7, right? My overtime. Okay. So so what I want, I'm not going to go into too much of this, but what I want you guys to really do is come up with 3 recovery ideas that are going to act for a hard training session, a weight session, and a light session. And this is going to be your homework. And so I can follow up with all of these guys and make sure that they've done it. But for those guys over here and for yourself, it would be something that's going to be valuable. You might already have some ideas that you know are meeting your recovery, and just jotting it down, you can tear it apart. I mean, not tear it apart. Tear it off the package and put it on your fridge so you have those ideas in front of your face, and you know that they're going to be things that are easy to make, that you actually will eat, and that are things that you have access to. So you may not be having anything too fancy in your recovery, but some basic things that you can have. Okay, so remember that first slide I showed you of the rowers? This is kind of eventually what we see happening in the whole day. So when we take in your pre-nutrition, your recovery, your in-training nutrition, we're adding, say, a breakfast before that training session, then recovery is a second breakfast, which rowers often do. They're having some sports drink during their session. And then you're looking at those 2 red stars in the middle would be 2 pre-training meals and a snack. Going into the second session, they're also having a little bit of sports drink. They're recovering with kind of a chocolate milk-based smoothie. There's a recipe in the package with a chocolate milk-based smoothie. And then they're having dinner and an evening snack. So it all kind of comes together with a lot of different food and different times of eating. So again, this is for a rower. So they might be eating a little bit more than other athletes. Okay, so I just wanted to, sorry, I meant to not have that out front. I just wanted to do a little bit on supplements versus food sources, and just make sure that, people realize that food does act as a really great source of protein and a source of recovery. However, I understand that sometimes athletes might use supplements because you have a very busy schedule, you have training, you might have school, you might be working as well, and sometimes it's tough to make, this beautiful quinoa salad. There's a recipe for it in the package because of timing. So you might want to use a protein powder to get your protein in. So I'm sorry that this is covered, but essentially was looking at the cost difference between chicken and protein powder, and that there is a little bit more of an expense with a supplement compared to a whole food. Depending, if you're buying like organic, free-range chicken from a really expensive grocery store, it might be equally as expensive. But they're getting about the same amount of protein. What's really important when you are choosing a protein powder is that you are looking for a third-party tested protein powder. Does anyone know which 2 companies are important to look at for third-party tested? Yep, NSF for Sport. And what's the, it's a check mark. It's a green check mark. Yes, thank you, Rob. So NSF for Sport and Informed Choice are your 2 go-tos. So if you haven't heard this before, us sport dietitians tend to drone on about it, but those are really what you're looking for. And they both, you can Google them, and they have full websites, and you could find specific products that you can buy at, say, Popeyes or GNC that are actually informed choice tested. If you're going to a supplement store, make sure you know what you're getting. That is a full that is a tested product, because staff will try to talk you into anything. Just be like, nope, I know what I want, and you know the product that is going to be informed tested. And I also sometimes I find, especially young athletes, in some sports are really focused on gaining mass. And so they want to add a little bit of extra calories through a supplement, and mass gainers are huge. So this is pretty common in very like power-focused sports. And I just wanted to, draw your attention to making a homemade smoothie that actually has skim milk powder in it, so an actual food source that is dried milk powder or dried milk that you can find in the grocery store, compared to buying a mass gainer. And actually, it is almost half the cost of making the smoothie, and essentially the same amount of, more calories, about the same carbohydrate, and the same amount of protein. So really, you don't always need to use certain supplements, and I use mass gainer as a very strong example, because I find a lot of my power sports tend to focus on that. Yeah. Okay, so I just I'm going to stop there. But the next bunch of slides, and I'll make sure everyone here has the full slide deck, are a lot of different recipes, from like quinoa salads to energy balls to some smoothie recipes to some protein pancakes. So just to give you a few different ideas, they can act as in training or recovery, or even some of them can act as a really nice pre-training, either that hour to 2 hours before. Okay, that's it. Thanks, guys. Oh. Sure. So I would use, you need to use a full strength sports drink. So noon or none, however you like to say it, will not work, because it has no to very little carbohydrate. Same with like the BioSteel pink drink is an electrolyte only drink. It does not have any carbohydrates. So you need to use something like Gatorade, not G2, something like Eload. GU has a couple really great sports drinks as well, but it has to be full strength. What kind of foods do you need before an intensive workout? So again, using those pre-training blocks as examples, you want to follow those different blocks. So as you get closer to that training session, you want to kind of cut back the protein, the fiber, and the fat, and be choosing a more carbohydrate-focused option. And often when you're going into a really intense training session, a liquid option might work better. So you might have a smoothie an hour before. It's going to be really easy on your gut. And then maybe you just have some sips of a sports drink, whether it's commercial or a homemade sports drink, and that's going to be a little bit easier on your stomach as well. I find it similar to those who go into a race situation. Liquids can be a little bit easier on your stomach. Potentially, you'd need a little bit more of an investigation with that of really what she's taking in before and after. Sometimes when a stomach is not used to a volume of fluid, it can feel quite uneasy after training or during training and get quite nauseous. I find it's also just training the gut with the volume of training for one, and then the volume of food. So I find it might ease off after just training, keep trying to eat those foods. I also would consider simpler carbohydrate foods, so similar to the other question, but it might be, she might just have some white toast with some honey on it. That's really easy to digest and really easy on the stomach, or some like crackers that are still carbohydrate rich but quite easy on the stomach. And the same for the recovery as well. So having a very simple carbohydrate rich recovery that's quite easy on the tummy might feel a little bit better as she builds up her tolerance. But I mean, it's kind of those are individual cases that take a little bit more digging.
This question's probably way too loaded for this, but I'll give it a broad overview. Is an all-vegetarian diet as effective as a diet with one with meats and pros and cons?
Oh, that question. So my belief is, and what I try to do with the athlete, if an athlete is choosing a vegetarian diet, especially a mature athlete who's put some good thought into it, they really need support with it. It is not an easy diet to make sure you're getting enough protein. You're also considering things like iron needs, your B12, things like zinc intake. Calcium intake can also be a concern. So if an athlete is considering a vegetarian diet, they need support. So they need to see nutrition support to make sure that they're getting enough. Because I've seen it done with other athletes as well, but it's required a lot of nutrition support. Yeah.
One more. Probably quick overview. Would you incorporate caffeine in training rules?
So when it comes to what I call ergogenic supplements or performance-based supplements, I typically use them with a more mature athlete, so more of a senior-based athlete who has the foundations fully done. Like they've dialed in all their foundations. When you talk about things like caffeine, that's where you get that 1%. That's where all those 1%ers are going to come. But that foundation needs to be really solid. So I don't use caffeine with any junior athletes. I don't often use them with even U23 athletes. I look at more of senior athletes. Yeah.
And then you've got a whole bunch of things.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I know it's a lot of information. Okay. Raph, you get on those recovery ideas. You write down those recovery ideas. I did this recipe with a bunch of like teenage rugby girls, and then they made it for like the next 4 days in a row. They loved it so much. It's my favorite recipe. So good. And you can make like volumes of it. Yeah. Sure is. I love that cookbook. And I haven't seen their second one yet. I need to, is it? What's it? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Okay.